Hello there. This is your first session on basics and strategy for sentence equivalence and text completion. Now, what you need to fundamentally understand about the verbal part of the GRE exam is that this section is titled Verbal Reasoning. Now, it's not just a mere test of verbal ability or your ability to use vocabulary and things like that, or be able to spot vocabulary in terms of synonyms or antonyms or anything of that sort. Now, it is called reasoning for a specific reason. Uh, Now, both sentence equivalence and text completion questions are definitely a test of vocabulary. So number one, they are a test of vocabulary. But remember that this is a test of vocabulary in a particular context, which means this is a test of your ability to be able to use vocabulary in a particular context. So the test is not just about how well you know vocabulary, it is also how well you can actually use vocabulary given a context. That's precisely why this section is called verbal reasoning. And both sentence equivalence and text completion questions are context-based vocabulary testing. Now, when we say context-based, what they give you is a sentence or a text with a blank or a few blanks in the text, and then you are asked to fill in the blanks with the appropriate choices given a few of them. Now let's take a look at a quick overview of what these questions look like, what is it that we need to know, and then we will get into this aspect of how we develop a strategy to tackle these questions as such. Now, what you see on your screen is something that's very elementary introduction. Now, what are the sentence equivalence questions? As your slide says, this is a sentence equivalence question type, which means what you'll be given is one sentence. It is a sentence. You're given one blank. You're given 6 answer options, and you have to choose 2 out of those 6 answer options. Now, how do you choose these 2 answer options is the tricky part. Now, this is called sentence equivalence, which means that when you're given this a sentence with a blank and 6 answer options and you choose 2 out of these 6, remember that these 2 answer choices, when independently plugged into the blank of the given sentence, should give you 2 sentences which are equal in meaning. That's precisely why this section is titled sentence equivalence. So can we actually look at 2 sentences which mean the same, but with a change of just one word in that sentence? So use 2 different words in a sentence to mean 2 equal sentences. That's exactly what this section is all about. Now here's the tricky part. There is no partial credit for these questions, which means that if you've got one of these correct and the other wrong out of these 6, you will not get any partial credit. You have to get both the choices correct. Then, like I already mentioned, this is not just a test of vocabulary, but it's a test of logical ability also. In other words, when you talk about logical ability, it is a test of your ability to actually spot the right grammatically correct choice, the choice that is also syntactically correct, the choice that is closest in meaning, and can give you 2 equal sentences. Let's take a look at how the directions on your GRE test will look like for sentence equivalence. Now these are the directions. This says that select 2 answer choices that, when used to complete the sentence, fit the meaning of the sentence as a whole and produce completed sentences that are alike in meaning. So this is exactly what we are trying to imply when we say that this is a test of producing 2 equal meaning sentences with just a use of 2 different words which are actually similar in meaning. Now let's take a quick look at what these text completion questions are. Now, what is the structure of these questions? These are a little different from sentence equivalence questions. Now, sentence equivalence questions contain, as the title suggests, exactly one sentence, but this is text completion, so a text can mean one sentence, or on the GRE you can have up to a maximum of 5 sentences. So 1 to 5 sentences is what your text will contain. Now, these questions can have 1 blank, 2 blanks, or even 3 blanks. Now, don't be under any impression that when you're given only 1 sentence for text completion, that 1 sentence questions will have exactly 1 blank. That is not the case. 1 sentence question can have 3 blanks also. So the number of blanks is not directly proportional to the number of sentences in your question. So just bear that in mind. Now, Three answer choices per each blank will be your answer options. So you have three blanks, you're given three answer options. So let's say you have in three columns, let's call them column 1, column 2 and column 3. So in three columns you have three answer options. So what you have to do is you have to select the right answer option from each column that corresponds to that particular blank. So for the first blank you choose one from three choices here. For the second blank you choose one from three choices here, and from the third blank you choose one from three choices here. Now remember that. Now of course if you're looking at single blank questions or one blank questions, you have only 5 answer choices and you choose exactly one. So likewise, if you have, let's say, two blank questions, you'll only have two such columns. You choose one from each column corresponding to the blank. That's exactly what this point says. Each blank to be filled with exactly one choice corresponding to that blank. Again, no credit for partially correct answers, which means you have to get in a three blank question all the three answer options correct. Only then will you get credit for that particular question. Now, remember one thing here. Text completion questions are often they sort of create some sort of panic in students, especially when they're dealing with two blanks and three blank questions. Now understand that just because you're given a three blank question with 3 plus 3 plus 3 choices, that does not necessarily mean that the sentence or the text itself is very complex and that you're being tested tested on your ability to use a lot of vocabulary. That need not be the case. Now remember that uh, the difficulty of a question is not directly proportional to the length of your question. So remember that very fundamentally. So just because you look at a just because you look at a fairly a long question in text completion does not mean that uh, answering that question is also difficult. That need not be the case. For all you know, you might have a single blank question with just one sentence, but that can be a killer question. So it can work either ways. So don't just not attempt a question or don't just skip a question looking at the length of a question. But then again, we already discussed in the introduction class that you don't skip any questions whatsoever on the GRE because there is no, technically there's no negative marking. Now, what is the primary skill that is being tested here? This is your primary skill that's being tested here for on the text completion questions. Now, your ability to recognize how different parts of a sentence, or let's call it how different parts of a text, let me include text also, contribute to the overall interpretation of the sentence or the text. So it's not just one particular part of a sentence or a text that you're talking about, but you're looking at how multiple aspects of a text contribute to the overall interpretation of the text. That's a primary skill that's being tested here. And these are your standard directions for the text completion. Select one entry for each blank from the corresponding column of choices. This is assuming that you have, let's say, multiple blanks. Fill all blanks in the way that best completes the text. These are some introductory points that you have to keep in mind. Now let's take a quick look at the tips that you need to know for sentence equivalence when you're actually trying to solve these questions on the exam. Now, here on your screen you have 6 different points listed down. Let's take a look at each of them and just try to quickly analyze what each of these stands for. First one, merely do not look for a pair of synonyms. Now this is one mistake that students tend to make. You're given one sentence, one blank and 6 choices. You have to produce 2 synonymous sentences. That does not mean that the question is actually testing your ability to spot pairs of synonyms. It's not as simple as that. Now remember that out of the 6 choices you have, there is every likelihood that there are 3 pairs of synonyms in your 6 choices. So which pair of synonyms would you choose then? That remains a question. So remember that it's not just your ability to choose a pair of synonyms that is being tested here. You have to be extremely cautious. You have to choose those 2 synonyms that fit into the context and can produce equal meaning sentences. So that's point number 1. Point number 2. Read the sentence and get the overall meaning of the sentence. Now, what students tend to do is this. Now, your sentence on the sentence equivalence can have multiple parts, multiple clauses, multiple ideas. What these are, we will actually look at how we understand this with the help of examples a little later. But understand that one single sentence can have multiple clauses or multiple ideas. Now, the blank is there in your sentence in one of the clauses or in one of the ideas. Now, students tend to make a mistake that they focus only on that particular part of the sentence which has a blank and sort of ignore the rest of the sentence. If that were the case, then very likely you will fall into the trap of choosing the wrong options because we don't get the overall contextual meaning of the sentence. So for that, you have to read the sentence and get the overall meaning. Point number 3. Look for pointer words in the sentence. Now, what these pointer words are, we will actually take a look at in detail a little later in the coming slides. But when we say pointer words, remember these pointer words are those indicator words that help you get the overall meaning of the sentence. So when you read a sentence, you have to keep your antennas and your eyes open in trying to spot for clues. Remember that sentence equivalence is actually a fairly easy easy question type, skill type rather. Same with text completion also. Now you simply have to look carefully for those clues that help you uh, distinguish between the meaning of one part of your text versus the other part of the text. So what these indicator words are, we'll take a look at them a little later. Now, point number 4, fill in the blank with an appropriate and familiar word. So once you look for pointer words and once you get the overall meaning of your sentence, now remember that you try to fill in the blank with something that you think can fit into the blank. Don't really worry and break your heads about what the right choice is as such, but you try to figure out what word can, what word when put into the sentence can give you a logical sense of the sentence. Then make sure that you look for logically, grammatically and stylistically correct answer options. Now why are we saying that this is important? Now remember that let's say your blank in the sentence or the text requires that you fill the blank with either adjectives or adverbs. So you have to look for adjectives or adverbs only in your answer options. So you don't choose a pair of synonyms in their noun forms anymore, because those noun forms will not make sense in that particular blank when you are actually required to fill in the blank with modifiers like adjectives and adverbs. So be a little cautious about that point. Of course, this is how much ever I insist on this, this is extremely important. You have to learn vocabulary for GRE, the kind of vocabulary that GRE will test you on. So learning vocabulary is important. Also, it's important that in these question types, you are able to apply what you have learned in these question types. Now let's take a look at certain tips that you are required to know for text completion again. Now, point number 1, read the text thoroughly to get an overall idea of the context. Now, this is an extremely important point. Now, when we say that read the text thoroughly to get an overall idea of the context, we are implying here that like we said earlier, your text may have anywhere between 1 to 5 sentences. When it has 1 to 5 sentences, each of these sentences within themselves, each of these sentences within itself can actually have multiple ideas or multiple clauses again. And those multiple clauses, you have to understand the connection between one part of the sentence to the other part of the sentence, and also understand the connection between one sentence of the text to another sentence of the text. So you need to be able to read the text completely and get an overall idea of what the text is trying to convey even before you actually jump into figuring out what choices would fill in those blanks as such. So this is an extremely important point. Point number 2. Decide whether the blank requires a positive, negative or neutral word. Now let's suppose you're looking at a 3 blank question, a text that has 3 different blanks. Now these 3 different blanks could be a part of one single sentence, or they could be a part of 2 sentences or 3 sentences or 4 sentences, it doesn't matter. Now, irrespective of how many sentences are given in the text, what you have to keep in mind is, depending on the idea that you've gotten from the overall context of the text, you try to figure out if each of these blanks requires a positive word or a negative word. So what sort of a connotation, what sort of a denotation should actually go into that particular word? That will help you actually jump to the choices and eliminate those choices that don't fit into your understanding of positive or negative words that should fit into your blank. Point number 3. This is again common to both text completion and sentence equivalence. Look for pointer words, indicators that will help you understand what the sentence means or what the text means. Another important point is text completion can be a little trickier than sentence equivalence in the sense that text completion can actually use figures of speech like similes and metaphors and these kinds of examples. Now, when you actually do your exercise at the end of the strategy session and at the end of the other sessions, you will understand and you will be able to understand how text completion can test you on usage of similes or metaphors and all these things given in a text, and what that particular simile or metaphor means can play a role on what word should fill the blank as such. Point number 5. Check for relevance of choices one blank at a time. This is extremely important. So don't try to, let's say, spend a lot of effort and figure out what the three options or how to fill the three blanks in one go. Take them one at a time. Try to see which ones fill one blank at a time, and that should give you a good idea about how you go about filling the entire context. And of course, this is again common to what we discussed for sentence equivalence, importance of vocabulary for GRE.